Well, thank you very much, David, for that great presentation. And I mean, I have been following this project, but seeing it again has raised so many new questions for me, and it's such a complex bit of work. I'll maybe just turn the floor over, see if people have questions, comments, discussion.
I'll go.
Start speaking, the camera will.
Okay, I'm on. David, thank you very much. It's Brian Wilson from UBC talking. This was wonderful. Thanks so much for that. I have a few questions, but I'll just maybe start with one, and it has to do with the. I was curious. Perhaps you'll say a little bit about this as part of the answer about what was actually produced by those who you were working with. And part of what I was thinking about was how when people produce things, they use content that they've been exposed to elsewhere. So if I'm going to produce a message, it's for me drawing on other messages often or creatively thinking about those. And it made me think about the kinds of messages that would have been produced about the games in mainstream media, I assume that would have been surrounding the lead up to the games. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the content that was produced by those you're working with and where they seem to draw messages that informed their content.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a really good question, actually. I kind of deliberately didn't talk too much about content just because I felt that the process was probably interesting for the nature of the seminar. But you're right. There was lots of content produced, and I think it is a really interesting study in its own right to look at the nature of that content. And we have done a bit of work on that, and continue to do a bit of work on that. So it differed depending upon which groups we're talking about. So there was as I said, there was a big schools program, and it was really interesting because, again, as we said, we tried to make that pretty open, but used just some thematics just to get people to help them to think about where they might want to put that content. So the place and exchange and culture ideas. But we found it actually was very, very interested in the schools depending upon which parts of Scotland that they were in, for example. So we had island schools, for example. A large number of our islands on the west coast of Scotland were involved in the project and produced some really interesting content around about being a part of an island community, for example, as part of the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth, of course, had many very small nations that were also island communities, and there were some really interesting links produced by those. So teachers were really creative, actually, with their pupils in linking it with the curriculum they were already working with to produce some kind of, they did so Skype, quite often did Skype calls where they recorded them. They ended up producing artistic works. They had poets who came over from some of the other Commonwealth countries to interact with the pupils. And in terms of where the messages that they were then responding to came from, in many respects, the Commonwealth Games, as a large sport event, not the biggest obviously, but as a large sporting event, it did become part of the curriculum. So there was a whole programme round about the sort of Commonwealth Games that was involved in the curriculum. So all schools in Scotland were doing something on the Commonwealth as part of the curriculum activity. So I guess what we did, we just said, well, actually, you're already interacting with this, that you can actually now turn some of that into some kind of media content. So that was often podcasts or videos that they did around about perhaps a Commonwealth athlete that was in their area, or actually more likely there's a twinning arrangement or an interaction with an overseas partner. And for example, around about the social media, many of the schools were sort of playing with around about how they could actually ensure that they got quite a lot of dissemination of the material, sharing through retweeting of their content with schools in different parts of the Commonwealth. So the schools program, people were really creative, and it tended to be local, and it tended to be about, for example, other Commonwealth connections in your area, or if you live in the south of Scotland, other Commonwealth connections in the area that you could, some famous person who come from that area who's well known in other Commonwealth countries, and they used that as the kind of way in. The community media work was interesting because the focus was more local. So in the north of Scotland, we had a community media network. We also had in the west of Scotland, where the Commonwealth Games were actually held in Glasgow. And I think what was interesting about the Glasgow context was that there were groups that we worked with who lived in the east end of the city. They were particularly interested because they were very vociferous in their I guess condemnation of some of the developments that accompanied the Commonwealth Games. So they were some of the groups who were very interested in thinking about how they might use media, but they were coming at it from a more political perspective. And again, there was that was interesting in terms of the content they produced, but also how they thought about their media and the production of that media and the implications of that for the communities that they were residing within. During the games time, there was some interesting content, some interesting stories that were produced about things that were happening in the east end of the city as a result of the games that perhaps weren't finding any mainstream attention. But I guess just it's worth reiterating that we actually deliberately didn't set out to kind of be a platform for just critical perspectives on the games, because I guess in terms of people understanding how they might use media, produce media, and think about contributing media in this space that we're in now, then we felt that wasn't going to be that helpful for ensuring that people could get those digital literacies. And actually, we found that there were already other groups that were doing that kind of work. In terms of the content, just finally for the Creative Voices part of the project, which was the kind of songwriting and film and creative writing, then again, people, a lot of the older adults that were involved in both writing songs, but also in actually producing pieces of creative writing, poetry, and other outcomes. They were often reflecting back on what the Commonwealth meant, for example, some time ago. And again, that was kind of really interesting in respect of the sort of topics that they chose to focus upon in comparison to how the young people were thinking about the Commonwealth, because the Commonwealth as a whole notion clearly is quite challenging for many people. And so the teachers in the school environment were using that as a kind of history lesson to think about the Commonwealth and its currency. Now, the older adults tended to focus back on what they thought the Commonwealth was at the time when perhaps they were growing up.
Great. Thanks very much.
I had a question. One of the slides you had that had the list of questions that people were asking and working through, and one was, how do I submit something to the Digital Commonwealth? I would like to know how people submitted things, but equally, I'm assuming that you came across things online that were using the project hashtag, and yet you have no other indication of how the person who produced this, what do they know about the project? Are they using the hashtag because they want us to share it? How is it coming to our attention? And what did you do when you were unsure about the person's intent in sort of labeling it Digital Commonwealth?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question and probably quite a challenging one. We did a previous project, which was, as I mentioned before, called Citizen Relay, which was a project that we developed the hashtag Citizen Relay, and everything in the project was hashtag Citizen Relay, and Twitter was, I guess, getting going at that time. So people, the range of people who were involved in this project was around about the Olympic torch relay, and when it travelled around Scotland in 2012. And that project, the hashtag began to take over. People began to use it as a tag to share lots of really interesting photographs of the local community celebrations and events in it. And the official hashtags actually just went by the wayside, and people began to use Citizen Relay as this thing. So we got a huge amount of traffic. And what was interesting about it was just how any kind of negative space within there actually was kind of diluted quite quickly. And we did monitor it, we did kind of participate in it, but not to a great extent. Now, the Digital Commonwealth project, we were, as I said, funded by a charitable organisation, and some of the kind of conditions upon the material got was that we had to be aware of the sort of risk agenda around about people just using this space as a way of critiquing the Commonwealth Games, and so we did have to manage that to an extent. But what we found is that in the main, people were very positive on using this hashtag, and partly that's because the Commonwealth Games wasn't really that controversial in some respects, which is in itself interesting from another perspective around about my interest in events, because broadly in Glasgow, people have become quite used to these events and think they're broadly okay. But the content on the hashtag, we really didn't get that much traffic that was coming from, I guess, a slightly more critical perspective, where we weren't sure of people's intentions. During games time, we did get a little bit more of that, But again, it was just something that we tried to participate in, and where we felt again it was something that it was problematic. What you find most of the time on Twitter is that people, it quickly gets dismissed, or it quickly is diluted, and actually it wasn't so much activity taking place that it was problematic, and it was shifting the narrative that this was simply a critique of the games. But I do think that that's the first point about how people submitted content. They could submit content in a number of ways. So the idea of just having that opportunity for people to submit content was that so that it went beyond the project a little bit, and that we'd hoped that it went beyond the project in terms of the areas that we controlled. The Citizen Relay project, people submitted content to us about things happening in Orkney and the islands, and that we'd never been in touch with, we'd never interacted with them, and people could submit it via the website. They could submit it by tagging their content on YouTube playlists. We had audio boom playlists, etc. And actually, in the main, we actually produced much more content as part of Citizen Relay because of that. In the Digital Commonwealth project, most of the content was produced by the participants who were involved in the formal elements of the project, if you like. So it didn't have quite as much contribution from people who were just, for example, interested in producing some kind of media around about the game.
Thank you.
Me again.
Yes.
I'm curious to know the extent to which, so clearly the speaker series is at least in part about the use of these technologies as part of doing the work. To what extent do you think you could have done, or what would this project have looked like 30 years ago? Could you have done something like this with other kinds of technology? I guess I'm trying to parse out the extent to which it mattered that you did this right now versus another moment in time, even 10 years ago.
Again, I think that's a really excellent question. I think the part that we did with the creative voices could have been done. All we did really was we for that part of the project, we digitized a lot of the material that was produced and shared it and showed people and helped people understand the audience and where the audience was. But for some more of the digital elements of that, then I think the challenge with some of the media that we would have had even a decade ago was that it was still reliant on relatively big pieces of equipment, and I think you required more expertise just to get people past the front door. And so the organizations, for example, that we worked with as part of this project, and the people who are individuals who got involved because they were in a school environment or otherwise, we were really relying upon their device, so that the ability that they could, through their device, have a little app that allowed them to record a piece of audio, 3 minutes, and share that audio. And that the quality of that sound was pretty good. We did purchase as part of the project, some small kits that you could add on just to improve sound quality or whatever. But again, everything was done inexpensively. And so I think some of the schools that we worked with had big radio studios, and some maybe had TV studios, but many of these weren't really used very, very much in the school environment now, because again, people were using more available handheld devices even to produce audio for radio programs and other things. So I think the project would have been different because I think less people would have been able to get involved. It would have been more difficult for us to work closely with people to ensure that they actually developed the skills and competencies, because some of the complexities of doing that work was more difficult. But I still think we end up with the same challenges around about what's a piece of media and what's a story that would have been the same 10 years ago, because those things, I guess, don't change as much. It's just the mechanism to produce the story and disseminate it and share it easily has changed quite a lot. We absolutely were able to talk to people more quickly around about what the audience and the kind of interactions that then they could get with people in St. Lucia when the school had produced a piece of audio and shared it, and then the immediate interactions of what that was like. That was quite different, I think, than we would have seen even 10 years ago in terms of where that material went and how quickly it went. So a couple of the schools did some really interesting stuff around about how many retweets and how quickly their tweets would go around the world, and that was they used that to work with the pupils, both in terms of, wow, isn't that amazing? Look how the potential audience or imagined audience is there, but also imagine were this something that you didn't want to go around the world very quickly. you need to be aware then of some of the challenges around about social media and how it can go viral, and that might be less positive what we were doing as part of this project.
Maybe a really quick follow-up. I mean, I think about this when I teach in the classroom about how I'm going to show a YouTube video as a way of trying to make a point, and I realize that I'm having the class sit through like a 30-second advertisement for an upcoming film. I need to sort of pull that off. So I'm curious to know, with the different technologies you were using, the extent to which you were concerned about it, mattered to you that sort of advertisements, sort of corporate infiltration were part of that with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of does and did matter to us, but it was challenging, and it's challenging how you can, which platforms you can use that can be used effectively. So, for example, when we look about Facebook and we look at a number of the schools that we worked with, were using Facebook for some reasons, and many weren't, but there didn't seem to be any logic as to why they were using one or other. Some were using YouTube, some had YouTube channels, and were using it as a way of communicating and distributing information anyway. Others weren't even able to open it up. There was just complete lockdown in their systems. So I guess what we tried to do was, yes, to talk about the challenges of each of these platforms and potentially some of the commercial imperatives that many of them have, and use that as a way of helping the young people we worked with, for example, or some of the community members we worked with, to think about making those choices and how you might want to go about making those choices, and some of the challenges of being able to actually make a choice when many of these platforms are commercially owned and used. And that was, I think that was interesting. And I think since the project, about a year since the project maybe sort of finished, we've been back and working with the schools, and some of the schools have really sort of moved on in terms of how they've developed whole school policies around about what's permissible and otherwise, where some of those lockdowns were unnecessarily risk averse, but also where potentially some other platforms may need to be monitored more carefully. And I think that's the really difficult minefield of this stuff. It's just about how to keep track and keep up, especially for schools, and keep up for ourselves, of course, as well. But for those kind of primary or secondary related schools, where again there's not an awful lot of time for colleagues to go out and get continuing professional development around about digital work. So we have presented to a broader range of school teachers as well around about some of the sort of issues that come out from our project, that as part of what they call digital learning days, that are now becoming more common within the school environments that we worked with. But yeah, it's an ongoing challenge around about the platforms that you may wish to approve or otherwise.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Hi, David.
Hello.
Welcome to UBC. And thank you for outlining the work you've been doing. Truly, it's a ton of work, and longitudinally as well. And so I appreciate that. But I want to ask a question about the big picture here. So you have, what effectively looks like audience studies or spectator studies, right? And beyond, keeping the great Commonwealth united here as one of your more major purposes, are you trying to move these spectators from from watching the games to actually participating, to becoming football players or wrestlers? Or what is the bigger picture here or the bigger purposes of what you're trying to do?
Well, I mean, I think I'm not really trying to move the spectators into participating in the games, I guess, but the participation agenda, it was an important feature of the project, more from the point of view of participating in actually the narrative about games like these, events like these. And it's not just the Commonwealth Games. There are larger debates going on around other large-scale events like the Olympics and otherwise about the nature of how we understand that those games and those events and what they're for, and the kind of involvement of the event awarding bodies, but also sponsors, in other words, and others, in dictating what these games are. There's been a lot of work in the Olympics done around about citizen media and community media and alternative media and its success, or otherwise, but it tends to be quite a small group people, I think, who are involved in opposing the games, for example, that get maybe quite a lot of attention, but there's not a huge amount of membership as part of that. This wasn't simply about that, but it was about trying to democratize access and understanding of producing media to a wider range of people than normally happens part of, for example, an event like this. So it was about that idea of literacies and trying to help people to understand a little bit about how they can network together and produce something quite interesting. If they understand how the technology and the platforms work, less technology actually, probably just the platforms work, and also the practices that go alongside that. So the idea here was to pull together a variety of different groups and individuals and actually show that with a bit of planning and a bit of organization, you can actually produce a story or a set of stories that are actually quite interesting to other people. And you don't need to be a media professional, for example, to do that. And secondly, there's a lot of sort of organizations that we work with, for example, not in the sports realm actually, but in more in sort of community development realm and community groups, who are looking to have some control over the way they are represented and the way they represent their members. And again, part of this was also about ensuring that they were given the capability and the capacity and supported to actually do that work rather than have that done to them, have them represented by an established media that perhaps didn't have the time or energy to actually go in and do proper work with them. So out of the project, a number of organizations and individuals now do their own media or work with and produce their own media. And it may be that they simply use a WordPress blog, and it may be that they simply produce pieces of audio or video or they write blogs regularly. But that in itself has been quite valuable for those organizations, understanding how that media works.
Yes.
David, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Mark Edwards. I'm really interested in a phrase that you said towards the end of your presentation that caught my attention, given the wide audience and the range of participants that you had involved. And the statement was, informed consent can be problematic, so an ongoing conversation about consent needs to take place. And I find that intriguing whenever we're working with digital media and participants in research. What does that mean?
Well, what I meant was that the process of securing it at the beginning and just that being enough is problematic. But it's but just in a maybe in a university environment that we apply for ethics approval for a project we're intending to do. We have information sheets, we have consent forms, and we ask people to complete them at the beginning of the project or before the project, and then that's sometimes perceived to be sufficient. And I guess the point I was making was that actually it needs to be an ongoing process, and that actually in this kind of work in particular, at the beginning, many of the people that we worked with weren't as digitally literate and understanding what it was that may have been produced as they were after they've been involved in some workshops and after they've been involved in that process, and just ensuring that we were always aware that they knew what they would be producing and where that might be held and where it might be available to people. So rather than problematic wasn't the right word in terms of it was problematic to get it was actually about how we ensure that we continually engage with those that were involved in the project, ensure that they continue to understand that this is where the material may go. And the point I was trying to make about archiving, which is, about actually we're asked when we archive these websites for the project, for example, about whether we have that consent, whether we have these, and we had all these forms that we produced with people that we're able to show them. But as a practice, you often feel that you need to keep going back and say, are we sure that you were aware of where this was going to go, and that you were, because with a large group of people that obviously becomes more difficult, more stretched it becomes. So I think it was we definitely tried to ensure that throughout the process and throughout delivery and then debriefs when we worked with people that they were continually engaged with this idea that this project will be there somewhere. It will be you'll be able to find it somewhere, for example, and if people were still happy that material was there.
I really appreciate that, because I think it's something that we should all take to heart, that informed consent once doesn't necessarily mean that it's consent continuously forever. When conditions change, context change, or people's understanding grows in terms of what's meant by what they've consented to. which is a real problem as in your case, people were increasing their knowledge of what's possible and what it means. And at the beginning, they didn't have that knowledge.
And I think it's very difficult. It's a really interesting discussion point, because I think it's very difficult to, when you conceive of projects and when you're bidding for these projects, about how you can ensure that and you can build it into something that's often got a time stamp on it. And I think I think that a lot of the responsibility comes from when you then do something with the material afterwards, and that's again where it becomes even more difficult to go back and say, well, actually, you may wish to publish something, you may wish to talk about something, and how you think and talk about those that were involved is difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe just a sort of follow up on that, but I mean, what you said about that process of the ongoing consent and the ongoing discussions, but equally, how do you talk to participants, or what was the conversation around, once we put this up, we can, if you want something out of our archives, we can do that, or we can talk to you about where we're sharing it. But once it's out there, other groups, other individuals can use it for their own purposes. And neither you nor the participant has any ability to stop that.
Yeah, and I think that we sort of did both of those things, Andrea, in terms of right throughout the sort of learning that we're engaged with some of the groups that we worked with. We were making it clear where that would go and what could potentially happen. One of the things about ownership was where I think we would go back to on that, which was, especially when we worked with schools, we were very keen that they developed their own resources and that they found a solution to be able to host the content on their own servers, for example. And some were saying, well, why would we want to do that? Can you not just host it, and you host it for us, and we'll do that? And partly the discussion was about, well, you need to know what you're doing. You have your own issues around about how you engage with parents about taking photographs of the children or sharing material of the children. We need to think about developing an approach, a policy, a framework for how you go about doing that on a regular basis. And if you wish to develop more of this material and you want to continue to do this kind of activity, then it's best that you understand where to have it, and your ICT people and others can then ensure that you're approaching it in the right way beyond our project. And that was more manageable, where the schools had the responsibility beyond, and we would maybe just have shared that content or shared the links to that content during the project itself. But so yeah, I mean, I think it is difficult to go back to people, ad infinitum. It's not going to happen. So it was important for us just to make sure that people during the process where it was going to go, and it was going to be on the website, and the website was going to be archived, and that was the main place for the. But we know that there's this huge challenge about where materials go beyond the point where we publish them, and how we can control that. And I think that's a challenge in particular, I think, for young people. Thinking about the kind of everyday interactions that they have in some of these spaces. And I think increasingly the digital rights agenda is about that. So I know in the UK, in Scotland, we have a movement called 5 Rights, which is about the kind of right to privacy, the right to remove in particular has become a big one. And I think that's, even when we started this project, that movement wasn't as now. And I think it really makes young people think about what they do with the material that they've posted, and whether they can actually have any chance to have that taken down if they so wish.
Thank you.